Now let's talk about how to use axios to make other requests, like get, put, post, delete. Now this is very similar to fetch. If you know fetch, it will be easier for you to understand axios, because axios only makes things easier. Right now, I'm under 07 axios passing data to server. This is how we make a get request using axios. As you can see, we're trying to get a user with ID equal to 123. And we can simply just using response or response.data. There's no need to convert it to JSON. Simply just use response.data. And this is equivalent, so this one is equivalent to this one. That is, if you do not want to put parameters in query string, axios provide an alternative. And you can package all your parameters in something called params. Now, this name, you cannot make your own name. You have to use params. So this is equivalent to find1 question mark ID equal to 123. I prefer using this one because this is more organized. So here, the URL only specifies which servlet I'm interested in. And here, the params include all the parameters. Here is how we use axios to send a delete request. As you can see, all we need to do is send this delete question mark ID equal to 123. We're going to delete a user with ID equal to 123. And this is a response from the backend. We need to respond.data. That's all we need. No need to convert to JSON. And here's a post. How we can save a user, a brand new user called Harry Potter. We have our URL, and all we need to do is to pass a JS object. This is a JavaScript object. This is not JSON string to this axios. Let me show you how we did this using fetch. Here is how we send a post using fetch. It's very similar, but if you compare this in fetch, we first have to convert this JS object into JSON string using json.stringify. But in axios, we no longer need to have this extra step. You can pass a JS object to axios post, and axios will convert this automatically behind the scene into JSON string. So it's very convenient. All we are working with are pure JavaScript. And here's put. It's very similar. No longer need to convert to JSON. So in summary, using axios, we can make our coding shorter and cleaner. Next, let me show you more features of axios. We can set global axios defaults. For example, let's say we're going to access this API from jsonplaceholder.com. We're going to get the first to-do in to-do list. So let's take a look at this website. So this is jsonstakeholder.com. And here's one example. And in the example on the website, they're using fetch, but we're using axios. So we're getting the first to-do in to-dos. So if I press try it, and this one returns the first to-do. So in order to make this request, we have to include a long domain name, and also here is the resource on the website, on the server side. Besides to-do, if I scroll down on this website, it also provides posts, comments, albums, photos, to-dos, users. They all have one thing in common, is they all need to have a same prefix, that is https://jsonplaceholder.typicode.com, but they have different resource path. So let's say we're making requests to all of those. It will be tedious to repeatedly writing the same prefix over and over. In axios, we can set a base URL. In this case, it will be the domain name. Once this base URL is set, all axios requests, when we send them out, will prepend this base URL in front of the URL. For example, now once we set this, if we are going to make this request, you no longer need to copy this long prefix. We simply need to put to-do 1. Now pay attention. I include this / here in base URL. So all you need to do here is have to-do /1. So if I want to access all the to-dos, I can simply put to-dos. Basically, here it should be to-dos. The second feature is we can set some common headers to every axios request. For example, if every axios request must have a header called authentication and equal to a token returned from the server side, now we're using JWT or JSON Web Token Authentication. Now, if you have time in this course, we're going to talk about how to use this to authentication. We no longer need session or cookie. So this is a more modern way to do it. So let's say we got some token from server side. We're trying to put this in every request header. It will be tedious to put it to every request before we send it. So we can do it in one line of code. And every time we send a request, this header will be automatically sent with this request. Now in this case, we can also set a content type header only to post request. Now this one is for all, for get, post, delete, put. You can also tell Axios, I only want to attach this header, now this is a form submission, to every post request. Now let me run this program and show you some result. Now we're going to use this axios to make a get request to get the first to-do in to-dos. Once we get this response, we're going to print response.data. Now this one returns the first to-do, and we're only interested in the title, because if you take a look at this example here, so this is the response.data. We only want response.data.title. Of course, you can also use .completed or .id or .user ID. So if I press axios response.html, and this is the title. So the next important feature of Axios I want to introduce is called interceptors. So there are two kinds of interceptors. We can intercept all requests, or we can intercept all responses. What does it mean? So before I show you the code, let me show you a picture. So let's assume that we're using axios.get to request 5 random jokes from Internet Chuck Norris database. Now, if we define a request and a response interceptor, here is the flow. When this function gets executed, the request is not going directly to the ICNDB server. It goes to the interceptor first, because this is supposed to intercept all requests before they send to the real server. This guy here can do some processing to the content that will be sent to the server and then let go. Once we receive the response from the server, it will not go to this .get directly. Instead, it will go to the response interceptor first and do some pre-processing and then let go, and the request goes back to the initiator. Let's take a look at the code of the request and response interceptors. In this case, we're going to make a request to request 5 random jokes. And here's how we define our request interceptor. Before this request gets to the Chuck Norris database server, we're going to add a header called authorization equal to this is a token. We do this for no reason. We simply want to show you that the interceptor really works. And in the response, what we did is, once we get this response from the server, we're going to get the data from the response and return only the data. So that means once this get receives this response is actually already response.data. I know this sounds kind of confusing. So what happened is the response interceptor already retrieved the data for us. This callback function no longer need to use response.data. So here, if we log out response, this response has the 5 jokes, the payload, not other stuff like status equal to 200 or MSG messages. So let me show this demo here. Now when I press 09 axios interceptors.html, I got an error. So what is the problem? If you read this, it says access to XHR at this domain and random 5 from localhost 8080. So you should know that we're making the request from localhost, in other words, my machine, so this is the source, this is the target. This request has been blocked by CORS, Cross-Origin Resource Sharing Policy. Request header field authorization is not allowed on the server side. So that means this server here, the ICDB server here, by default will not allow a header called authorization. So that means I have to call this guy and tell them to make sure they change this setting. But of course, I cannot call them because I don't know anybody over there. So this example shows that the request interceptor did work. it add a header, but guess what? The server here rejects this. So we didn't really receive any. We did receive a response, but the response is failure. Next, let me show you. I'm going to comment out this interceptor and only show you the response interceptor. So I have commented out the request interceptor because this will cause CORS problem. In this case, before the response really gets back here, this interceptor intercepts this response, retrieves data, and return only the data. So this data here has the 5 random joke array. So let's see what happened. Pay attention to console. I'm going to press 09. As you can see, the response has 2 attributes, type, success, and here is the value. Here is the value. So let me explain this more because I'm sure many students will feel confused. Because in here, we print response directly. And many students will ask, I remember you said we need to do response.data because response has many headers or other attributes we do not need. What we really need is response.data. For example, here, response.data. What happened here is before the response, so this response is different from the response in 06 axios, because in here, we do not have a response interceptor. The response gets sent directly from the server to us. That's why we have to use response.data. But in this case, the response, the real response, first comes to response interceptor. And we already retrieved this data and then return it to the downstream, in this case, this guy. So the response here is already response.data. I'm sorry we're using the same term. I deliberately use this one to confuse you. So think twice. Maybe this picture can help you. So once the response comes here, this is a response that has many other stuff we do not need. But what this response interceptor is doing is it only returns response data to this downstream consumer. So this response here is a formal parameter. It actually has the value of response.data. So when we print response here, is equal to reprint the original response.data. I hope this can clear this out and not make you more confused.